Hello, I'm Holly Tarquini. Welcome to the F-Rated podcast. The F is for feminist, and that's intersectional feminist. When I created the F rating in 2014, it was to champion women on screen and behind the camera. So it's awarded to every film which is directed and or written by a woman. And if the film is written by a woman, directed by a woman and stars a woman, then it gets a triple F rating, which is our gold star. In this podcast, we're showcasing remarkable British women who are working in film and have made fantastic films as a way of inspiring the next generation of filmmakers, composers, writers, film critics, film exhibitors, and everyone else. So, if you are a woman, if you've met a woman, if you're interested in film, if you've watched a film, if you like film, then listen to this podcast. So today I'm here with my co-host, journalist and broadcaster Anu Anand, so I'm going to introduce her properly in a moment. After this episode, you can hear in the other podcasts from remarkable women in film. So we've got Amma Asante, so she is an amazing director who actually started her career as an actor in Grange Hill. We'll also hear from Nainita Desai, who has won more awards, I think, than anybody else I've ever come across for her compositions of all kinds of films, including for Sama. We'll hear from Rebecca O'Brien, who started out almost on My Beautiful Laundrette and moved on to produce all of Ken Loach's films, and so many more women. But first, I'm going to say hello to Anu. Anu, it's so nice to see you in person.
I know, isn't it funny? Here we are in your lovely study, and I'm just looking around at these great pictures of your kids and the artwork, and this is not how we actually met, is it?
I know, we met online in lockdown, didn't we?
Yeah.
Which is very weird, and actually, it took us quite a long time to meet in person.
It did. It feels like a very long time ago, doesn't it? And I imagine that there's a lot of people who started things in lockdown, and so did we, i.e. this podcast, but we're finishing it too. And I'm really proud of that, actually.
The women that we spoke to were fantastic. Yeah. And in a way, I can't quite believe that we got to talk to them all.
Yeah. And I feel like, I mean, this is a film podcast, so not to be over dramatic or anything, but I do feel like fate slightly brought us together in a weird kind of way, because let me just explain that if I can. I just feel like it's quite rare to meet, especially randomly like we did, two women who have been around, done some amazing things, but have families, have kind of chosen to not live in that crazy rat race world, but who still do stuff that they love. And I feel like you came into my life at that point where I stepped off the hamster wheel and just went, oh my God, what next? What am I doing? So I feel like you were kind of, I don't know, it was just the right moment.
Yeah, I love it when life happens like that. So do you remember who introduced us?
I do.
Yeah, so we were introduced by Margaret Heffernan, who, if nobody knows, Margaret Heffernan is one of my absolute idols. She writes about, so she used to be a broadcaster, didn't she?
Yeah.
And before that worked in television, but then went and was the CEO of massive tech companies. And now she writes books about management and does TED Talks that are watched by millions of people. And we're both lucky enough to know her. And she got in touch with me and said, oh, I just met this woman. You should, I don't know what synergies there are, but you should get in touch with her.
So that was like the female network at work. And you're lucky enough to know her. I just went, hi, Margaret Heffernan, in an email. Can I please meet you for coffee? I have no idea what I'm doing. And to her credit, she did meet me for coffee. And then that was the end of it until then she introduced us. And when you say management books, I mean, she doesn't just write management books. I mean, she does things like willful blindness, cooperation, not competition. I mean, these are kind of shifting entirely the way that we think about stuff, which I hope this podcast does too, by the way.
Well, and actually she's written the most beautiful feminist treatise. So she's also a staunch feminist. Yes, and they're not management books in that kind of, how to stop procrastinating kind of a way. Yeah. What I love about her books is that she's a brilliant researcher. Yeah. And so she finds the best stories to illustrate these really pertinent points. I feel as though Margaret has, the brains of about 9 people. and she seems to get more done in a day than I manage in a year.
Yeah, same. But, just coming back to that kind of fate and timing, actually the other thing I was going to say is that I feel like of all the things that were going on in my life at the time, and are kind of still going on, change of career, growing children, et cetera, the thing that ties all of this together, Margaret, you, me, the podcast, is feminism and in a way sexism, the other side of the coin. And it's really hard to put all that into words, but I feel like the podcast has actually helped me to kind of draw together those things that we know in our bones, but find it kind of hard to articulate on a personal level. And that is how sexism, how baked in it is, and how much it drives so many things in our lives, really from the time we are young girls. And I imagine that you have that. You've probably been articulating it more than the rest of us.
Yeah, I've got so much to say about this. It's so huge because I do feel as though being a feminist is a journey of self-development. So I think the whole lifetime of mine, so I'm 52 I think, or 51, I can never remember. I'm
going to be 50.
Yeah, so I'm 50 something, and my feminist journey has been very much about unpicking all the beliefs that I've held in my life because of the culture that I've been in. So that whole thing of kind of, you don't know the sea that you swim in until you, as that fish, get kind of lifted out of the pool and shown it. And I've been lucky enough to come across remarkable feminists and brilliant feminist films, which have allowed me to look at myself. But the question that I'm always asking is, what else am I not seeing? What else is in that sea that I haven't noticed yet? So I think kind of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter really made us, we knew about systemic racism. We knew that we were inherently racist. But we didn't really have enough language to articulate it and to really challenge ourselves and how uncomfortable it is to be colonial. I'm a colonial, my whole background is a colonialist. I'm a white, middle-class British woman. I'm a colonizer. And
my ancestors were colonized by yours. No, I mean, I'm the grandchild of refugees at partition. Economic migrants, my parents. So yeah,
and it's really interesting. And I do feel, I've always felt, especially partition, I don't know why, but partition I feel almost kind of personally responsible for and guilty about. And I know that guilt is useless. It's no help to anybody at all. But again, I think all of that unpacking of sexism, racism. I was a misogynist when I was a child. I hated women. I didn't want to be them. I didn't want to be like them. I called myself George. I wanted to be a boy.
Wow.
And I really, really hated the whole role of women. I hated high heels. I hated very feminine women. I hated lipstick. I was such a misogynist. And I think it was because those weren't the role models that I wanted to be, and I didn't really have those role models. And that's also why film is so important to me, because I never looked at Ginger Rogers. I only looked at Fred. I was only interested in the men and the boys because they were the main characters and they were shown to me to be the important ones. And actually, I hated Ginger Rogers. I totally bought the whole narrative that she was difficult. Of course, she was fucking difficult. She was dancing backwards in high heels to Fred Astaire's exacting regime, and being the sidekick when actually she was more talented and she never had the name, she never had the money, So, and all of that I've been unpicking for 50 years.
So tell me then, when you went from 6-year-old misogynist, when did you realize, oh dear, I am a woman? When did that moment happen where you went, no, actually, I have to be a feminist? And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more. I will share with you, what early films had an impact on me. And I agree, they taught me to be absolutely misogynistic in two cultures. So double the fun. But what for you was that turning point?
I don't know.
There's not a light bulb moment. It happened gradually.
No, I mean, I would say Wonder Woman, which is quite recent, that was a real light bulb moment in that I sobbed the whole way through Wonder Woman because I wished that my 7-year-old self could have watched that film because it would have meant so much to me as a child.
Have you seen this meme on Facebook where there's two hands and one's holding a blue pill, one's holding a red pill, and one pill says, pill A takes you back to when you were 6 with all the knowledge you have today, and pill B, you can have $10 million. And I'm really tempted by pill A because I think that if we could go back to our young girl selves and realize that we were being played so massively, things might turn out different. Although, I'll take the 10 million as well, but
You know where the pills come from, don't you?
from is it from The Matrix?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And The Matrix was made by 2 trans women.
No.
Yeah.
See, I learned so much every time I talk to you. No, I didn't know that.
So at the time, they were called the Wachowski brothers, but they're now the Wachowski sisters.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And there is a whole analogy that The Matrix is looking at life before you know you're trans and then when you know you're trans. And so, I mean, there's analogies across everybody has different meanings from The Matrix. And of course, there's the whole kind of, is it red pilled or blue pilled? I get my colours mixed up with
red
the
and blue,
pills.
yeah.
That you are red pilled if you have gone down the path of misogyny and recognising that feminism has been terrible for all men and all women, that women actually want and should be in the kitchen, all of that kind of, you've been red pilled because you've seen the light. I prefer the trans analogy myself.
Yeah. I had no idea that random meme was going to open up a whole new portal of feminism. That's great. That's great. So I grew up with both Bollywood, well, that's what it's called here, Hindi films, where, my God, I can still remember. So there was one whole film in which a woman who cannot conceive a child is demonized and hounded. And when I look back as a woman, who's had children, who's kind of been through that whole journey, I am astonished and appalled and heartbroken that that's what I was watching as a child, because I completely internalized the idea that her failure to have children made her useless and totally undesirable, worthless. And I can think of so many things that I grew up with that were like that. And then on the flip side, I grew up in the US. So I grew up with the commercialized, sexualized, commodified version of, femininity. So cheerleaders, and you talk about Wonder Woman. I used to rip out pages of, who was the actress? Linda, oh man.
Linda Carter.
That's it, Linda Carter. I wanted to be her, and I just, she did have my color hair. That was one good thing, but I couldn't be her, and it was really, what's the word? It was kind of destroyed my sense of like, I just knew I could never look like that. Before I could even understand that was a thing to feel, I kind of knew that I could never be that. So I really feel like in every culture there is this streak baked in right at like DNA level, which says, if you are a woman, you need to be this kind of woman, or you need to be that kind of woman, or whatever.
Well, it's only lately reading, do you know Sophie Hagen, who's a fantastic comedian?
No.
So she's brilliant. And she wrote a book called Happy Fat, and she's a fat activist. And it's only in the last 2 months reading that book that I've recognised how fat phobic I am, and how I actually do really believe that one of the goals of my life is to be thin, and that somehow if I achieve that on my deathbed, I'll get the medal for having not been fat. For fuck's sake.
I want to see that on your headstone. I don't want to see your headstone, but...
Yeah, congratulations, Holly Tarquini. She managed to not be fat
Right.
I mean, what a life goal. And also,
Yeah.
but the anger and resentment that I feel for the amount of space that's occupied in my mind, in my life, in my anxiety. And I don't feel as though any of that is innate. None of that comes from me. All of that has been handed to me by patriarchy. And fuck it. And also, that's only the latest thing that I've spotted. Imagine the 60 other things that I'm going to spot through the rest of my life.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, let's talk about films, because I think one of the things that happens, and even for those of us who work in, say, creative or public-facing industries, is we imagine that there's this group of lucky women in the industry somewhere. Golden girls, maybe they're blonde, maybe they're tall, maybe they're skinny. I don't know. They're childless. I don't know what the ideal is, but that somewhere, say in journalism where I've been, or film, there's the perfect woman who's having success. And I think one of the things that's really surprised me and has been a real eye-opener over the last few years, and when I met you, I'd walked away from a job because all I saw was decimated women. I mean, professionally kind of put in a box, limited, women reeling and grieving from having invested decades into something and just not getting to the same place as the men. And it's been really instructive, that even the women who we think have got that success are facing a lot of the same barriers that we are. And they're being judged maybe in different ways, but they're still being judged. And I wonder if you talk a little bit about the film world and, why did you want to make this podcast? Why is it necessary to talk about women in film? I mean, any film you turn on, there is a woman in it, isn't there?
So I feel as though the film industry is like America in that that great American dream that anybody can be the president, that all you have to do is be brilliant. And the film industry forever, I think, has been seen as that it's a meritocracy. If you're brilliant, you'll rise to the top. And so if there aren't any women at the top, it's because they're not brilliant. Because it should be the best person for the job. With no kind of understanding of the fact that we employ in our image because that's comfortable and it's safe and it's not challenging. We don't tend to employ intersectional feminists because intersectional feminists ask all the difficult questions and also demand things like Nora Ephron ran a set where you could go home at 4 or 5 o'clock because you might have kids and you might need to take care of them.
And women do most of the unpaid labor.
And women do most of the unpaid labour. So the idea that the film world is a meritocracy is pervasive and absolutely untrue. The F rating, I came up with it in 2014. It's quite a long time ago now, which was...
Buffy. Go away, Buffy. We're talking feminism in films. That's Holly's lovely dog. We may hear Buffy. It's okay.
That's my needy, insecure dog. So Me Too didn't happen till 2017. Time's Up was 2018. So it was quite a way before all of that had happened. But the F rating and I were in a long line of feminists campaigning for film. So there were obviously women in film from day one working incredibly hard. When film became expensive and crucially there was lots of money to be made, the women were eked out into the edit suite and behind the scenes and in front of the camera still to be looked at through the male gaze, but much less as the tellers of the story.
And I should just say really quickly that you just stay tuned, because one of the most fascinating episodes that we recorded that you'll get to hear is with someone who's done a fabulous history of women in Hollywood. But continue.
It's the Helen O'Hara podcast, and she is magnificent. So if you want to know about which women there were at the beginning of film, what they were doing, how involved they were, how significant they were, and how emphatically they were cut out of not just the industry but out of the history of film, which is really...
It's jaw-dropping. It's the kind of thing that would be an absolute scandal today. And you're reading it going, how do I not know this? How do I not know this? I'm an educated person. How do we not know that this happened? It's jaw-dropping.
And there are people like Somaya, who is a fantastic academic and activist who's been telling everybody about all of the women in film forever, and they've been doing that for the whole of their life. There are a lot of people like that are out there that are trying to tell those stories, but they don't get the coverage, they don't get the attention, it just doesn't... They don't get the attention they need. And that's why our podcast is so important, because what we're doing is championing and shining a light on just a handful of some of the brilliant women who have made fantastic films. And actually, I think it's a shame that they're all brilliant, because mediocre men they fail upwards. So they make a rubbish movie. Oh, well, maybe he was just having a bad day, or, the script wasn't brilliant, so we'll give him another chance. Whereas women, if they make a terrible film, women shouldn't direct films. They fail for all women, not even just for themselves. Yeah. And they're never given the funding and opportunity to make a feature film again. Yeah. And so, yes, I would
and let's just to say, that's not you saying that. The statistics tell us that.
Yeah.
Here she comes. She's got her statistics. Go on, tell us.
So the statistics are horrendous. I set up the F rating in the first place because the top 250 films of 2014 had, as ever, been 95% directed by men.
Wow.
And that's not just men. That's straight, white, heterosexual, able-bodied, cisgendered American men, which is a really tiny niche window through which to see the stories which influence us the most. Yeah. And figures have improved. I mean, the amount of campaigning that's gone on. And again, this is unpaid. You and I aren't being paid to do this podcast.
No, we are not being paid by anyone.
And we haven't gone out and to be fair, we haven't
asked for it. But...
We haven't asked anybody for it, and we haven't put ads in because we hate ads. So that's our choice. But as ever, two women working for nothing to campaign for the benefit of other women, and also not only other women, because actually this benefits the majority of men and boys, because actually setting that one example of a hero that can solve everything and do everything and is powerful and strong and not sweet and sensitive, that is a male character that doesn't have any of the qualities that most women want, that doesn't have any of the qualities that most fathers need, is toxic for everybody. So this is good and beneficial to everybody.
I mean, I do feel like I was thinking about it on the way over here, that I relish these opportunities to talk to other women, because I feel like suddenly I'm speaking a language that someone else understands and values, whereas I feel like I have to hide it from the rest of the world, because then no one, the kind of conventional world isn't interested. But you're right that I feel that we are in a period where a lot of people are trying to have that conversation much more broadly, and it is absolutely for everyone's benefit. So I mean, I think I've learned so much, and what you said about men failing upwards. So the women we talk to have faced all these barriers, and they're still there. I mean, just the sheer tenacity. And they're also, a lot of them are also parents. They're battling with with being on the sharp end of sexism in multiple dimensions as well. So, there's a lot to learn from them and a lot to celebrate.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting, isn't it? Lots of the women that we've spoken to, when we've talked to them about, like Nainita, I remember, who's remarkable composer, she was saying that when she'd worked for lots of male directors, and then she suddenly worked for a woman, and she said it was a completely different experience. And I think that's interesting as well, is that all these women have worked in a predominantly male environment that they've had to kind of step up through. God, I was having such an interesting, I have to tell you, I was having such an interesting conversation with somebody the other day about, so she is very, very big in tech and digital. And she said when she first got into it, she just adopted the alpha male personality, because that's what you had to do to succeed. And it's what you often find in film, is the women that are at the top of studios and things are often, they behave very much like the male execs.
Oh, but it's the same in law and business and journalism. You've got to be, quote unquote, a bitch. You've got to be mean to succeed for some bizarre reason.
And misogynistic. Yeah. You need to not support women, and you need to be brutal and awful. And so she adopted that personality, which isn't her at all. And then, because she's a massive intellect, she realised that there was far more power and strength in being vulnerable. And by being vulnerable herself, it would invite in all the voices that weren't normally heard. And in tech and digital, what you need is innovation and new thoughts and new ideas. And you often have people that are introverts and don't really want to speak. But if you've got the top of the organization being vulnerable, suddenly you can speak and you can be involved. So I think that kind of why it is important to have equality and, more significantly, equity is because it benefits everybody.
It's like what we were saying right at the beginning, Margaret Heffernan writing about cooperation, not competition. It actually benefits everyone. It performs better in business. And, you know, as I'm listening to, I'm thinking about all kinds of things I've read recently, from Caroline Criado Perez's Invisible Women, which talks about the brilliance bias and the default male. You know, we've all downloaded that template. A doctor is a man, a construction worker is a man, etc. It goes on forever. And male qualities are the default qualities. But also, you know, Laura Bates and Everyday Sexism, where, you know, you're absolutely right. When it's the small things in daily life that can kind of add up to the giant train wrecks in society. So, you know, a lack of empathy at the top, a kind of brutal downward management that is seen as like a successful cutting edge behavior actually ends up creating a toxic mess that everybody, you know, it hurts everyone, whether it's a giant scandal, whether it's a failure to address a societal problem, whether it's a public health disparity, or whether it's poor storytelling from only one point of view. One of the things I love, Holly, I mean, really, it's kind of been like a kind of a intellectual and spiritual tonic for me. You know, it's been like, you know, the pandemic, oh, I'm so tired of it. And even after the pandemic. And then I watch some of the movies that we've had to watch in order to speak to these people. And I go, oh, wow. I mean, they are really fabulous. I mean, I did go into it going, well, you know, maybe the movie will be okay. And it ends up being like, how have I never seen this film? You know, they're really good. So that's something I hope that people are going to enjoy, because as we go through and talk to different women, we're going to talk about different films. I just wondered if, I mean, it doesn't have to be one of the ones we've talked about, but is there, like, for you, when you think of like feminist filmmaking, is there a kind of like the perfect example, or like a kind of utopian example of feminist film that you would actually recommend to watch as well? Has to be good.
See, I'm utterly useless at this question. As soon as anybody asks me about films...
You've run a film festival for like a decade. How is that possible?
Because every film now has left my brain.
Oh.
So I couldn't tell you a name of a single film.
Okay, all right.
No,
well,
give me 5 minutes.
I'll let you percolate on that. But I mean, I can, you know, recommend a lot of the brilliant films that we've watched. So Misbehavior... was it Rocks
and Suffragettes? Yeah, Rocks is so fantastic. I love Rocks.
I mean, if you just that film alone, if you haven't heard of it, you haven't watched it, just to give you a flavor of the treats you are in for, look up Rocks and Belle. Yeah, Rocks and Belle, and there are many more, but just look those two up just as a starting point, and have a watch, because it's an absolute treat. And then, of course, we get to talk to the women that actually were instrumental to making those films. Go on. You've got some more statistics. Go on, Holly.
So I wanted to go back to the numbers. So as I said, in 2014, when I came up with the F rating, fewer than 5% of the top 250 films were directed by women. Since then, there's been Me Too, there's been Time's Up, there was Michelle Williams being paid £80 a day, while Mark Wahlberg was paid 84 million. Not a day.
Was it? Oh, yeah, but that's still...
Her total was $1,000.
Wow.
She got per diems for pickups, and he got 84 million.
Wow.
Which he donated afterwards to Time's Up. So it's not him being a bad guy.
No, it's the system.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the system. And things have got marginally better. Well, they've got kind of a bit better. So there's been a 7% increase between 1998 and 2022 of F-rated films in the top films. So
did you say 7%?
Yes.
That's pretty modest, isn't it? Because don't we make up half the population?
No, we're more. So women in the UK and in America, we're 51%. So
there you go. We are the majority.
Yeah, and I find it so weird. We get spoken about under the term minorities in the same way that you think, has anybody counted Chinese at the moment? Has anybody counted the number of Asian people there are in the world at the moment? It's not a minority, people. This is an absolute nonsense. Minoritized, but not a minority, the majority. So yes, things have got fractionally better, and in lockdown it seemed that women were doing really well, and the reason for that is they were much smaller films. So there's basically a pyramid, that if you can picture it, of kind of cheap films, not cheap, but not really,
not big budget,
not massive tentpole big budget films at the bottom of the pyramid, and at the top of the pyramid you got your tentpole films, and there are fewer of them obviously because they're much more expensive. But with women, you've got quite a lot of women represented in documentary, which is the cheapest, lowest risk. And then as you edge upwards to the top of the pyramid, there are fewer and fewer. There used to be no women at the top of the pyramid, and now there are. So you've got, your Patty Jenkins, and you've got women that are directing big budget Marvel movies and those kinds of films. But there aren't very many of them. And when you watch the credits, there are very few women outside of costume and makeup. So makeup and costume are still predominantly female, and we need to get more blokes in there. But with the rest of them, and they are, costume and makeup are probably lower paid than lots of the other sections, which are as ever more valued because they're done by men. In the same way that nurses aren't as valued because
we're going to hear more about that too, and some pretty staggering evidence on it's not that women go into low paid jobs, it's that the jobs start paying less when women take them. You heard that correctly, but you'll hear more about that when we speak to Helen O'Hara.
It's absolutely shocking. And so yes, things are getting fractionally better, but obviously you need every layer of the film industry to change, because you can't have those directors directing tentpole films if they're not also ADs, assistant directors, if they're not runners, if they're not. So they need to, ideally, you don't want your first job to be directing, because you want to work up through the ranks, because then you learn the whole process and you learn how to do it. And I always think, you should never really be asking somebody to do something unless you kind of know how to do it and what you're asking them.
You're throwing them into a pretty impossible situation. It's kind of setting someone up for failure. No, and we'll hear a lot about that too. You're right that some of the conversations we've had is around how do you make opportunities for other women and other people, and it's tough because of the way film budgets and the way that the kind of hierarchy of it is set up and created. It's often quite difficult unless you already have a woman in that position where she can make the decision to empower other competent, talented women. It's quite an uphill struggle. So that's our podcast. I'm so excited about it. Yeah. And so tell us who we're going to hear from first.
So I do genuinely love every single person that we've spoken to. Our first is going to be Rebecca O'Brien, who is...
Are you going to say Ken Loach's producer?
I'm certainly not going to say Ken Loach's producer.
Go on. Let's introduce her very properly.
I wasn't going to say that.
I know you weren't.
So she is, a phenomenally experienced producer. And actually, My Beautiful Laundrette is the thing that she worked. She wasn't a producer on it. She was a production manager. But that for me is the kind of shining light of, remarkable. It was such a seminal film. And then, yes, she has produced all of Ken Loach's significant recent work.
Yeah, no, and I'm joking there because we talked to her about that. We're like, why are you referred to as Ken Loach's producer? Why isn't he Rebecca O'Brien's director? There is a kind of funny...
I still stand by that, that I think she should be a household. All the women that we've spoken to should be household names. Yeah. And I think it's highly likely that the majority of people, they haven't heard of them, but they've heard of their films.
Yeah. And we will hear some really interesting things from her. She definitely has she's so possessed of a kind of huge common sense and this incredible work ethic. She's really generous and honest. It's a really enjoyable episode. And she's got her own ideas about why she is or isn't known, which are super interesting. And she's great at explaining what a producer does, because I had no idea at all. And yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, and also that it's not clear in credits who is the producer.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely listen to that.
So Rebecca O'Brien, that's going to be our debut episode, and it is really fabulous. So Holly, where can people get in touch with the F Rating?
So our website is f-rated.org. On Facebook, we're f.rated.org, O-R-G. And on Twitter, we're f__rating.
Yeah, and please do like and subscribe to our F-Rated podcast. We've worked really hard on it, and we really think you'll enjoy it. And as Holly mentioned, we're not being paid. We're just being paid in likes and love out there. Thank you so much for listening to this. I'm Anu Anand.
And I'm Holly Tarquini.
And we look forward to having you along in our secret little world.